Elena had never been so far from home in her life. At 18, she was sent to live with Daniel, a widowed rancher who owned a large, isolated property on the outskirts of the town. Her relatives had made the decision for her, saying that the ranch would teach her responsibility and keep her safe. Yet as the wagon rolled over the uneven dirt road, she felt her heart race with a mix of fear and curiosity. The trees passed slowly, their long shadows stretching over the road, and the wind carried a smell of dry grass and earth. She wondered what kind of man Daniel was, and if he would be kind or cold and distant. The stories she had heard in town painted him as a quiet, lonely man who had shut the world out after losing his wife. Elena's stomach churned with uncertainty. When they reached the ranch, the house came into view. It was large and sturdy, built of weathered wood with a wide porch and a stone chimney that gave it a rustic, solid look. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the wind stirred the curtains in the windows. Daniel was there to meet her. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and hands that were rough from work, yet his eyes held a softness that surprised her. Elena had expected a stern, gruff man, but his voice, when he greeted her, was calm and careful. "You must be Elena," he said, his tone even but warm. "I'm Daniel. Welcome to my ranch." She nodded quietly, clutching the small bag she had brought with her. He noticed how nervous she was and didn't press her to speak. Instead, he offered her a tour of the property, starting with the barn, the stables, and the small garden behind the house. Elena tried to pay attention to the different animals and tools, but her mind kept wandering to the man who walked beside her. Daniel moved with purpose, yet never hurried her. Every few steps he would glance back to make sure she was following, and his eyes softened when she struggled to keep up with the pace over the uneven ground. When they reached the main house, Daniel stopped and gestured toward a small cabin near the edge of the property. "You'll stay there for now," he said. Elena blinked in surprise. She had expected a guest room in the main house. "It's my late wife's cabin. It's comfortable, and I think you'll like it. I want you to feel safe and have your own space." There was a quiet respect in his words, a thoughtfulness that touched Elena deeply. She realized that Daniel was not only kind, but he also cared about her comfort. The cabin was small but neat, with a wooden floor, a fireplace, and a bed neatly made with simple linens. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and the smell of polished wood and dried herbs made it feel homely. Elena put down her bag and looked around. She could see the ranch from the small porch. Rolling fields of grass stretched as far as she could see, dotted with horses grazing peacefully. For the first time since leaving home, she felt a small sense of calm. She stepped outside, taking in the vastness of the land, the sound of the wind in the tall grass, and the distant call of a hawk. Daniel handed her a basket with some fresh bread, cheese, and fruit. "You'll need something to eat after your trip," he said. Elena thanked him, feeling a warmth she hadn't expected. She wondered why he seemed so gentle, yet distant at the same time. He wasn't the kind of man who smiled often, yet he wasn't unfriendly. There was a careful balance in the way he treated her, and it made her curious about him. That evening, Elena helped Daniel with some chores around the ranch. He showed her how to feed the chickens, check the water troughs, and clean the stable. She struggled at first, her arms aching and her hands raw from the rough wood. But Daniel was patient. He corrected her gently when she made mistakes and praised her when she got things right. Elena noticed that he didn't just teach her about chores, he taught her about respect for the animals, the land, and the work that kept the ranch running. She felt a growing admiration for him, and with it, a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. After the chores were done, they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, reflecting off the fields like a painting. Daniel handed her a cup of warm milk and sat beside her, his presence steady and calm. Neither of them spoke much at first. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a quiet recognition of the new arrangement that had brought them together. Elena sipped her milk, feeling the tension in her body slowly fade. She realized that for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely alone. As night fell, Daniel offered her guidance on how to settle in for the night. "The cabin has everything you need," he said. "There's firewood for the fireplace, and I've left fresh linens on the bed. If you need anything, just let me know in the morning." Elena nodded, feeling grateful for his thoughtfulness. She climbed into the bed, pulling the warm covers around her, and stared at the ceiling. The cabin felt safe and quiet, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a measure of peace. That night, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her here. She remembered her old home, the relatives who had decided she should come to the ranch, and the nervous anticipation that had filled her on the wagon ride. She realized that this new place was not just a home. It was a chance to learn, grow, and perhaps discover parts of herself she had never known. Daniel's quiet presence had already begun to make a difference. She could sense that he was a man of principles, a man who valued honesty, hard work, and care for others. She wondered what the coming days would bring, and though a small fear lingered, it was tempered by curiosity and hope. The next morning, she awoke to the soft light filtering through the cabin windows. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and earth. She dressed quickly and stepped outside, taking in the beauty of the ranch in the early light. Daniel was already busy in the garden, his movements steady and purposeful. When he noticed her, he gave a small nod and a smile, the first true smile she had seen from him. "Good morning, Elena," he said. "Ready to start the day?" She nodded, feeling a strange mixture of nervousness and excitement. This was the start of something new, a chapter in her life she had not anticipated, but one that already promised growth, learning, and understanding. As she joined him in the garden, Daniel explained the tasks for the day. He taught her how to plant seeds, water the crops, and tend to the animals with care. Elena listened intently, absorbing every word. She realized that this ranch was more than a place of work. It was a place where values were lived and taught. She also began to notice the subtle kindnesses Daniel offered. A reassuring word, a gentle correction, a look that showed he respected her effort. These small gestures made her feel valued, and slowly, the initial fear and apprehension began to fade. Throughout the day, Elena found herself enjoying the rhythm of ranch life. The work was hard, but it was honest and meaningful. She discovered that Daniel, despite his reserved nature, had a deep understanding of the land and its needs. He taught her how to observe the animals, how to notice subtle changes in the weather, and how to anticipate challenges before they became problems. Elena felt a sense of pride in her own efforts, realizing that she was capable of more than she had imagined. By evening, they both sat on the porch again, tired but content. Daniel handed her a simple meal and they ate in companionable silence. Elena looked at him and felt a quiet gratitude. She realized that this man, who had seemed distant at first, was already teaching her something more valuable than chores or skills. He was teaching her resilience, patience, and the importance of care, for oneself, for others, and for the life around them. As night fell once more, Elena returned to the cabin, feeling a sense of peace she had not known before. She lay on the bed thinking about the day's lessons, the gentle guidance Daniel had given her, and the quiet moments they had shared. She understood that the coming days would bring challenges, adjustments, and new responsibilities, but she also felt a growing confidence that she could meet them. This ranch, once intimidating and lonely, was beginning to feel like a place where she could belong. And Daniel, The widowed rancher who had seemed so quiet and reserved was slowly becoming someone she could trust and respect. In the silence of the cabin, Elena allowed herself to dream. She imagined learning the rhythms of ranch life fully, discovering her own strengths, and building a sense of home where she could feel safe and valued. She thought about Daniel, not as a stranger, but as a man who had shown her kindness, patience, and understanding from the very first day. And as she drifted into sleep, Elena felt the first flickers of hope that this new chapter in her life, though unexpected and challenging, could also be filled with warmth, learning, and a sense of belonging that she had never before experienced. The days at the ranch settled into a quiet rhythm that Elena was slowly growing used to. She woke early each morning, the sun barely peeking over the hills, and stepped out onto the dew-covered grass. The air smelled fresh and earthy, and the sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cows, the clucking of chickens, and the rustle of the wind through the trees, had begun to feel familiar. Daniel was already working when she arrived, checking the fence lines and inspecting the horses in the far pasture. He nodded to her without a word, and she could sense his approval in the way his eyes met hers. There was a silent understanding between them now, one that had begun on her first day and was quietly deepening with each shared task. Elena found herself paying closer attention to the way the ranch functioned, learning not only the physical tasks, but also the subtle ways Daniel managed the land. He taught her how to read the weather by observing the clouds, how to notice if a horse was uneasy or a cow was sick, and even how to move quietly through the barn without startling the animals. It was hard work, and her muscles ached in ways she had never known, but each accomplishment brought a sense of pride and growing confidence. She noticed small details, the way Daniel's hands moved with precision, the careful way he tied ropes, the patience in his voice when he explained something more than once. She began to understand that his quiet nature was not coldness, but a discipline shaped by years of solitude and loss. One afternoon, as they finished the morning chores, Elena felt a sudden urge to know more about him. She had heard whispers in town about Daniel, stories of a man who had shut himself off after the death of his wife. But she realized that behind his reserved exterior, he was more complex than anyone imagined. Tentatively, she asked him about his past. Daniel paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked at her carefully. For a moment, it seemed as if he might decline to answer, but then he spoke softly, almost to himself. He told her about his life before the ranch had become his home, about the laughter and warmth that had once filled his house, and about the day he lost his wife to illness. His voice carried both sorrow and acceptance, and Elena listened, sensing the depth of his pain. She realized that Daniel's silence was a shield, not a wall, and that he had survived not by avoiding feelings, but by learning to carry them quietly. Elena shared some of her own story as well. She spoke of her childhood home, the relatives who had struggled to care for her, and the uncertainty she had felt when they sent her to the ranch. She had never spoken so openly about her fears and insecurities, but Daniel's calm presence made it easier. He didn't interrupt or offer hollow reassurances. He simply listened, acknowledging her words with nods and quiet understanding. By the time the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the fields with gold and orange light, they had exchanged more than just stories. They had begun to build a bond of trust, a connection born out of honesty and shared experience. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, Elena felt herself becoming more at home on the ranch. She learned to rise before dawn without complaint, to anticipate the needs of the animals, and to take pride in the small accomplishments that made life on the ranch run smoothly. Daniel, in turn, began to rely on her presence in ways he hadn't anticipated. He noticed that chores became lighter with her help, that the house felt warmer with her laughter, and that his own heart, long closed to companionship, began to feel a subtle openness again. The townspeople occasionally visited, bringing news and supplies, and Daniel's pride in Elena's abilities became apparent as he spoke to them. She was no longer just a girl sent to live on the ranch. She was part of its heartbeat, a presence that brought balance to the daily routine. One evening, as a storm began to gather in the distance, Elena felt a mixture of excitement and unease. The wind whipped through the trees, and dark clouds rolled across the sky. She had been inside the cabin, preparing for the storm, when the first crack of thunder shook the walls. The lightning illuminated the vast fields outside, and she felt a shiver of fear run through her. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and ran toward the main house. Daniel, noticing her movement, stepped out onto the porch and saw her approaching. "Elena, wait!" he called, his voice cutting through the roar of the storm. But she didn't stop. She was drawn by instinct, by a sense that she needed to be near him, that the storm had awakened something protective in her heart. When she reached the porch, Daniel handed her a lantern and guided her inside. The warmth of the house was a comfort, and the smell of burning wood in the fireplace filled the room. They sat together, the storm raging outside, and for the first time, Elena saw a new side of Daniel. He was not just the quiet, reserved rancher. He was a man who felt deeply, who cared for the safety and well-being of those around him. He told her stories of past storms, of nights spent tending the ranch in rain and wind, and she listened, fascinated by the strength and resilience he displayed. She realized that his life had been shaped by loss and hard work, but that he carried it with dignity and purpose. That night, after the storm passed, they sat on the porch together, watching the sky clear and the stars appear. Elena noticed that Daniel seemed more relaxed, more willing to share small smiles and quiet laughter. She felt a sense of belonging she had never known. She was no longer just a visitor. She was part of the ranch, part of his life, and she could see that he was beginning to feel the same. The bond between them was not yet spoken in words of affection, but it was there in glances, gestures, and shared silences. It was a bond of trust, understanding, and mutual respect, a connection that would shape the days to come. The next morning brought a new set of tasks, and Elena approached them with renewed confidence. She fed the animals, cleaned the barn, and helped Daniel repair a section of fence that had been damaged by the storm. With each task, she felt herself growing stronger, more capable, and more attuned to the rhythms of ranch life. Daniel noticed her progress, praising her effort and skill without exaggeration, and she appreciated the honesty and sincerity in his words. She began to see that life on the ranch was not just about work. It was about learning, growing, and finding a sense of purpose in the daily routine. Over the following weeks, Elena's confidence continued to grow. She began to anticipate Daniel's needs, to notice small details that improved the efficiency of the ranch, and to offer suggestions when appropriate. Daniel, in turn, began to include her more in decisions, seeking her input on planting schedules, animal care, and household management. It was a subtle shift, but one that made Elena feel valued and respected. She realized that this was more than just a temporary arrangement. It was an opportunity to learn, to contribute, and to become part of something larger than herself. One afternoon, as they were working together in the field, Daniel paused and looked at her with a rare softness in his eyes. "You've learned quickly," he said. "I didn't expect you to adapt so well." Elena felt a flush of pride at his words. "Thank you," she replied, feeling the warmth of his approval. There was a quiet understanding in that moment, an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them. It was not yet spoken aloud, but it was there, growing steadily, like the crops in the field around them. As the days turned into months, Elena began to feel a deep sense of belonging. She understood the rhythms of ranch life, the importance of hard work, and the value of trust and respect. Daniel, in turn, began to rely on her presence not just for help with chores, but as a source of companionship and understanding. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, rooted in shared experiences, mutual respect, and the quiet understanding that had begun on her very first day at the ranch. Elena had come to the ranch uncertain and afraid, but she was leaving each day stronger, wiser, and more confident in her place in the world. By the end of the second month, Elena had become an integral part of the ranch. She handled responsibilities with confidence, anticipated challenges, and had earned Daniel's quiet admiration. She had also learned more about his life, his past, and the losses he had endured. Through their conversations, work, and shared moments, a trust had been established that neither could have expected. Elena felt a growing sense of security and belonging, and Daniel, who had lived in solitude for so long, found himself quietly grateful for her presence, for the life and warmth she had brought back into his home. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills and the sky turned shades of purple and gold, Elena and Daniel sat on the porch, enjoying the peace that had settled over the ranch. They spoke little, but the comfort of each other's presence was enough. Elena realized that her life had changed in ways she had never imagined. She had come to the ranch uncertain, scared, and alone, but she had found guidance, care, and understanding in Daniel. He, in turn, had begun to rediscover a sense of purpose, a connection to life, and a quiet joy that he had not felt in years. Their days were filled with work, learning, and companionship, and each day brought new lessons, challenges, and moments of connection. It was clear that the bond they were forming would shape the future in ways neither could yet fully understand. Elena felt a sense of hope, a belief that she could face the days ahead with strength and courage. Daniel, quietly and without fanfare, felt the first stirrings of trust and openness he had experienced since the loss of his wife. Together, they navigated the rhythms of ranch life, each learning from the other, each finding comfort and stability in the presence of the other. And as night fell over the ranch, they both knew that life, though unpredictable and challenging, had begun to offer them something precious: connection, understanding, and the promise of a shared future filled with growth, respect, and quiet joy. The days on the ranch had begun to feel normal to Elena, yet she knew life here was never predictable. Each morning brought new work, new challenges, and new lessons about the land, the animals, and the man she had come to trust. Daniel had taught her not only how to care for the ranch, but also how to observe, plan, and act carefully. She had grown stronger, quicker, and more confident in her own abilities. She could now feed the animals efficiently, repair fences without constant instruction, and even anticipate the moods of the horses and cattle. But despite her growing skill, she always kept a cautious respect for the ranch and the man who had taken her in. One particular afternoon, Elena noticed a flicker of smoke in the distance. At first, she thought it was a farm worker's signal from another ranch. But as she squinted against the sunlight, she realized the smoke was coming from the barn. Her heart jumped, and a sense of urgency pushed her legs forward. She ran as fast as she could, calling out for Daniel. Panic surged through her chest. The barn housed not only hay, but also several horses, and she knew how quickly fire could spread among dry wood and hay. Daniel, hearing her shout, sprinted toward her. His broad shoulders cut through the afternoon heat as he reached her side. "What's wrong?" he called. Elena pointed toward the smoke, her voice shaking. "The barn! It's on fire!" Without hesitation, they both ran together. Flames licked the edges of the barn roof, and smoke filled the air, stinging Elena's eyes. She coughed and waved her hands, trying to clear it. Daniel grabbed her arm and pulled her just behind him, guiding her out of the worst of the smoke. "Stay low! We'll get the horses out first!" he shouted. They worked in tense silence, coordinating their movements with urgent efficiency. Elena opened stalls and called to the horses, guiding them toward the open field while Daniel cleared obstacles and kept the flames from spreading. She realized that her training over the past weeks had prepared her for moments like this. She moved with determination, her fear replaced by focus. Together they managed to get every horse out safely, though the barn continued to burn. The fire roared louder with each gust of wind, and the heat was almost unbearable. Elena felt her heart hammering, but Daniel's calm presence beside her kept her steady. Once the animals were safe, Daniel assessed the situation. He saw that the roof was collapsing and knew it was too late to save the barn. He turned to Elena, concern etched across his face. "You need to stay back," he warned, though his eyes reflected worry not just for the barn, but for her. Elena nodded, knowing he was right. Even though she had proven herself capable, fire was unpredictable, and Daniel could not afford any mistakes. She watched as he went toward the structure, grabbing buckets of water and using every tool available to slow the fire. Her chest tightened with anxiety. She had never seen him like this, so focused, so determined, so fearless. After what felt like hours but was only a short time, the flames finally began to die down. The barn was badly damaged, and most of the hay was lost, but the animals were safe. Daniel turned to Elena, his face covered in soot, hair damp with sweat. He didn't smile, but she could see the relief in his eyes. He reached out and pulled her into a firm but gentle hug. "You did well," he said quietly, his voice shaking slightly with emotion. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. She had never felt such fear and such relief at the same time. She had faced danger and survived it, and she knew that Daniel's presence had helped her do so. That night, Daniel insisted she stay inside the main house. The cabin was too close to the burned barn, and he didn't want her exposed to the smoke and potential danger. He prepared a warm meal, simple but nourishing, and sat with her while she ate. Elena realized how much he cared, not just about her safety, but about her comfort and well-being. It was a side of Daniel few people had seen, and it touched her deeply. They spoke little, but the quiet companionship was enough. She understood that words were sometimes unnecessary when trust and care were already established. In the following days, they worked together to clean up the damage. The fire had destroyed much of the stored hay, and the barn would need serious repairs. Daniel took the lead, showing Elena how to sort the materials, stack what could be saved, and prepare the area for reconstruction. She learned how to lift heavy beams, measure planks for repair, and organize the work so it could be done efficiently. Her muscles ached, but she felt a sense of pride. She was no longer just a girl sent to the ranch. She was part of its recovery, a participant in the life and work that kept the place running. Through this crisis, Elena saw new layers of Daniel's character. He was patient with the animals, firm but gentle with instructions, and unafraid to show concern for those around him. She noticed that he sometimes glanced at her with a mixture of pride and care, and it made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. There was a quiet intensity in him, a strength tempered by kindness, and Elena realized that he had been lonely for a long time, not because he was cold, but because he had been hurt and protective of his own heart. One evening, after the work was done and the barn partially rebuilt, Daniel suggested they take a break. He led Elena to a hill overlooking the ranch. The sun was setting, casting golden light across the fields, the trees, and the horses grazing peacefully. Elena felt a sense of calm wash over her, a stark contrast to the chaos of the fire weeks before. Daniel stood beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. He spoke quietly, telling her how proud he was of her courage during the fire and how much he had come to value her companionship. Elena listened, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She realized that this man, once reserved and distant, had begun to trust her completely, and that their bond had deepened beyond work or routine. Life gradually returned to its normal rhythm after the barn incident. Elena continued to learn, work, and grow, but she now carried a deeper understanding of Daniel and the ranch. She had faced danger, helped protect the animals, and witnessed the quiet strength that defined him. She felt a sense of purpose and belonging, knowing that her presence mattered and that she was contributing to something meaningful. Daniel, in turn, began to open up more, sharing memories, lessons, and moments of quiet reflection with her. They spoke of simple things: the growth of crops, the behavior of animals, the changing seasons, but also of life, resilience, and the importance of trust and care. Elena noticed small changes in Daniel's routine as well. He would pause to ask her opinion on tasks, he would share stories from his past, and he would occasionally offer a rare smile or word of encouragement. She realized that their lives were intertwined in ways neither had anticipated. They had faced challenges together, learned from each other, and grown stronger as a result. The fire, which could have been a moment of fear and loss, became a turning point, a moment that revealed their character, their courage, and the depth of their emerging bond. One rainy afternoon, as they worked in the garden repairing fences and clearing debris, Elena felt a sudden sense of peace. The sound of rain on the roof, the smell of wet earth, and the steady presence of Daniel beside her created a feeling of home and security she had never known. She realized that life on the ranch, though hard and unpredictable, was teaching her more than skills. It was teaching her resilience, trust, and the importance of connection. She began to understand that Daniel, though quiet and reserved, had a heart capable of great care, and that their bond was built not on romance, but on mutual respect, trust, and shared experience. As the weeks passed, Elena and Daniel settled into a rhythm that balanced work, learning, and companionship. They laughed together over small mishaps, celebrated minor victories in the fields and stables, and shared quiet moments of reflection as the sun set each evening. Elena felt herself growing stronger, more capable, and more confident, and she could sense that Daniel felt renewed purpose and quiet joy in their partnership. The ranch, once a place of solitude and work, had become a home filled with connection, understanding, and trust. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of orange, Daniel and Elena sat on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. They spoke little, but their presence spoke volumes. Elena realized that she had found a sense of safety and belonging she had never known, and Daniel realized that her presence had brought life and warmth back into his home. They had faced danger together, learned from one another, and formed a bond that was steady, quiet, and meaningful. It was a bond built on shared experience, trust, and the understanding that life, though unpredictable, could be richer when faced together. And in that quiet evening, with the ranch bathed in twilight, Elena understood that her life had changed forever. She had arrived uncertain, scared, and alone, but she was growing into a young woman capable, brave, and valued. Daniel, in turn, had discovered hope, purpose, and companionship that he had thought lost to grief. Together, they had faced challenges, learned lessons, and built a connection that would shape the days to come. It was not a story of sudden romance or dramatic gestures, but of two lives quietly transforming one another through courage, trust, and shared life. The weeks and months at the ranch passed quietly, yet each day brought small moments of growth, understanding, and connection. Elena had settled into her new life, finding joy in the work, the land, and the steady presence of Daniel. The ranch was no longer a place of uncertainty or fear for her. It had become a home, a place where she could learn, thrive, and feel safe. She moved with confidence now, feeding the animals, repairing fences, and caring for the garden with the same careful attention that Daniel displayed. The lessons he had taught her, the value of patience, respect for the land, and the importance of quiet observation, had become second nature. She felt proud of her work and increasingly aware of the impact she had on the ranch and on Daniel's life. Daniel noticed the changes in her as well. Her confidence, skill, and calm approach to the tasks at hand made the ranch operate more smoothly. But more than that, he saw the warmth she brought into the home and the life she breathed into the days. He had been lonely for so long, living in a house filled with memories of his late wife, and Elena's presence began to fill the emptiness he had learned to accept as normal. He found himself talking more, sharing small stories of his past, his hopes for the ranch, and even little worries he would have otherwise kept to himself. With Elena, he felt that rare kind of trust that allowed him to be open without fear. One morning, as the sun rose golden and bright over the rolling fields, Daniel noticed Elena standing near the fence, watching the horses graze. She had a serene expression, the kind that made the early morning seem softer, more peaceful. He walked up beside her silently, observing her for a moment. "You've done well," he said quietly, his voice carrying both pride and something deeper, though he did not try to define it. Elena turned to him, a small smile on her face. "Thank you, Daniel. I couldn't have done it without your guidance." The words were simple, but they held the weight of their shared experiences, the hard work, the lessons, and the bond they had forged over months of labor, laughter, and quiet companionship. Later that day, Daniel made a decision he had been contemplating for weeks. He led Elena to the porch and gestured toward the fields and the barn. "We've faced a lot together," he said, "and I realize how much you've become part of this place, part of my life. I want you to know that this ranch isn't just a place where you work. It's home, and I want you to feel like it belongs to you as much as it does to me." Elena felt her heart flutter. She hadn't expected such words, yet they resonated deeply within her. She had grown attached to the ranch, to its routines, and to the quiet, steadfast man who had welcomed her without hesitation. She nodded, unable to find words that could fully express her gratitude. Over the following weeks, their lives continued in a gentle rhythm of work, learning, and quiet companionship. Elena taught herself to anticipate Daniel's movements and thoughts, often completing small tasks before he even asked. Daniel noticed these moments and felt a quiet pride, a sense that their partnership had grown into something both practical and deeply meaningful. They shared meals on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, sometimes about the animals, sometimes about memories from the past, and sometimes just about the simple pleasures of a warm morning or a quiet evening. One afternoon, an unexpected opportunity arrived. Elena received a letter from her relatives offering her the chance to return home. The letter was polite, even encouraging, but it carried the expectation that she might leave the ranch and resume a more conventional life in town. She read the letter carefully, weighing her feelings and the choices before her. Returning home would mean leaving the life she had grown to love, leaving Daniel, and stepping back into the uncertainty of her previous world. Staying at the ranch meant continuing to grow, to learn, and to contribute in meaningful ways. But it also meant choosing a life that had been shaped by challenge, work, and a bond that was still quietly unfolding. That evening, she spoke to Daniel about the letter. She placed it on the table between them, unsure how to express the thoughts swirling in her mind. Daniel looked at her with steady eyes, waiting for her to speak. Finally, she said softly, "I could go back, but I don't want to. This place, this life, it feels like home. And you, You've helped me feel safe and capable. I don't want to leave." Daniel's expression softened, and he nodded, understanding more in her words than she had said aloud. He felt a quiet relief and an unexpected warmth, realizing that she had chosen to stay, not out of obligation, but because this life, this ranch, and the bond they shared had become something she valued deeply. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and Elena worked together to continue improving the ranch. They repaired the barn after the fire, rebuilt fences, and planted new crops in the fields. Elena became increasingly skilled, not only in physical labor but in decision-making and problem-solving. She began to notice the smallest details, the behavior of the animals, the weather patterns, and the subtle needs of the land, and used her observations to support Daniel in running the ranch efficiently. He encouraged her to trust her instincts, and she found herself making decisions with confidence, knowing he respected her judgment. Through it all, their bond deepened. It was not spoken in words of romance, but it was evident in the small gestures, the shared work, and the moments of quiet understanding. Daniel showed her respect, kindness, and trust, while Elena offered companionship, loyalty, and care. Their lives had intertwined in ways that neither had anticipated when she first arrived. The ranch was no longer just a place of work or survival. It was a home, a sanctuary, and a shared life built on trust, effort, and mutual respect. One crisp morning, they were out in the fields checking on the horses when a young colt stumbled and fell, its leg caught awkwardly beneath it. Elena reacted instantly, moving carefully to help, while Daniel guided her with calm instructions. Together, they lifted the colt, supporting it and calming it as best they could. Their coordination and trust in each other were evident, a product of months of working side by side. Once the colt was safe, Daniel looked at Elena with quiet pride. "You handled that well," he said. She smiled, her chest swelling with confidence and a sense of accomplishment. Moments like these were more than tasks. They were testaments to her growth, her courage, and the partnership they had built. As summer gave way to fall, the ranch thrived under their combined care. The crops grew strong, the animals were healthy, and the house and barns were well maintained. Elena had become an indispensable part of the ranch, not just in work, but in spirit. She had brought warmth, energy, and life back into Daniel's home, and he, in turn, had given her guidance, protection, and the freedom to grow. Their connection was quiet but profound, a bond of trust, respect, and shared experiences that had been forged through challenges, work, and companionship. One evening, as the sun set and the sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, Elena and Daniel sat on the porch, watching the horizon. The fields stretched before them, peaceful and still, and the animals grazed quietly. Elena felt a deep sense of contentment. She had arrived at the ranch scared, unsure, and alone, but she was leaving each day stronger, more confident, and filled with a sense of belonging she had never known before. Daniel glanced at her, his eyes soft and steady, and she felt a warmth in her chest. They did not need words to express their understanding. It was present in the quiet moments, the shared work, and the trust that had grown between them. Months later, as winter approached, Daniel and Elena prepared for the colder months. They gathered firewood, secured the barns, and ensured the animals had shelter and enough food. The work was demanding, but it was also rewarding. Elena reflected on how much she had grown, not just in skill, but in resilience, confidence, and emotional strength. She realized that the ranch, the work, and Daniel's guidance had given her something invaluable, a sense of purpose and a home where she could feel safe, capable, and valued. Daniel, too, recognized the change. He had found in Elena not just a helper, but a companion who brought life, warmth, and energy back into his home. He had learned to open his heart again, to trust, and to value another person's presence in ways he had thought were lost to grief. Their bond was quiet but unbreakable, built on shared experiences, trust, and the understanding that life, while unpredictable, was better when faced together. On a cold winter evening, as snow began to fall softly over the ranch, Daniel and Elena sat together by the fire in the main house. The warmth of the flames, the quiet of the snow outside, and the comfort of each other's presence made the house feel alive. Elena looked around, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the fear she had felt on her first day, the challenges she had faced, and the growth she had achieved. She realized that her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined, and she felt gratitude, not only for the safety, guidance, and home Daniel had provided, but for the bond they had forged. Daniel, watching her, felt a similar sense of fulfillment. He had once believed that he would remain alone, living in quiet solitude on the ranch, but Elena's presence had transformed not only his home, but his heart. He had found trust, companionship, and hope again, small, quiet, and steady, but profound. Together they had faced challenges, learned lessons, and grown stronger as individuals and as companions. And as the fire crackled and the snow fell gently outside, they knew that their lives had changed forever, for the better, because they had found in each other a rare connection that went beyond work, beyond friendship, and beyond what either had expected. The ranch, once a place of silence and routine, had become a home filled with life, warmth, and purpose. Elena had grown into a capable, confident young woman, while Daniel had rediscovered hope, joy, and companionship. Together they had transformed the ranch, their lives, and each other. And as they sat in the quiet of the evening watching the firelight dance across the walls, they understood that this life, filled with work, challenges, and mutual care, was a life worth living, a life that had changed everything, and a life that neither would ever take for granted.